So anyway, good afternoon, and thank you for joining. Again, my name is Donald Waters, and I am the Claims Branch Chief for the National Flood Insurance Claims Branch. We are very excited that you're here, and welcome any questions that you may have. We just ask that you put them into the chat. We have a number of slides with a lot of information, and so we want to go ahead and get started. And if you have some questions, please waste no time, put them in the chat. With me today is one of my co-workers, Lisa Tumset, and she's going to be handling the slides for us, okay? We were asked to discuss some coverages and what's covered in the National Flood Insurance Program, and also we thought it would be good to know some things that's not covered, as well as some exclusions. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you. Looks like I got a little issue here. You ready? Next slide. So we thought that we would let you get a little bit of information that FEMA is working on in terms of our strategic plans and our strategies. And one of them is, the vision is a prepared and resilient nation. And we work really hard on working with these goals to make sure that everybody is safe and we can take care of people. And the mission is to reduce disaster suffering, which is a really big order, but it's something that we're working hard on because we feel that people should protect what they have, and we want to help them do it. And so we want to build a world-class organization by focusing on our customer satisfaction, empowering people to drive action together and to make some decisions on their own. So we're excited about that. Next slide, please. In order to understand the National Flood Insurance Program, there's a couple of things that one needs to understand, I think, and that is that we have two programs that actually sell insurance, service insurance, and handle claims on behalf of the NFIP. One of them is called the WIO company, the Right Own Company. These are participating insurers, people like Allstate, Liberty Mutual, companies like that also sell the policy, service the policy, and pay the claim. And the adjusters are not hired by FEMA, but they're also hired by the company that you have your policy with to take care of you. Okay, next slide. And the other program that sells, process, manage, and hire adjusters is the National Flood Insurance Program. They sell on behalf of FEMA, and they're ran by contractors, and they also hire adjusters and handle the claim to the conclusion and take care of our policyholders on our behalf. And so those are the two programs that service policies and policyholders in managing the business of the National Flood Insurance Program claims, if you will. Next slide. The National Flood Insurance Program we have what we call one policy and three different forms of that policy. We have a dwelling form, a general property form for commercial type buildings, and also the Residential Condominium Building Association, or the RCBAP. And they have different kind of characteristics to them. And we normally talk a lot during the dwelling form. That's the single family policy, and it handles dwellings of 2 to 4 families a dwelling. And it's a residential renter also. And it's also the policy that if you lived in a RCBAP condominium association, you would have a dwelling policy for your personal properties in that RCBAP and your assessments as well. Next slide, please. Available amounts of insurance are established by Congress. Therefore, we call them statutory policies or statutory limits. So for the dwelling policy, the most that you could get for a single family dwelling or 1 to 4 family is $250,000 for the coverage for that building, and contents up to $100,000. And those numbers are established, like I said, by Congress. So they're in statute. Those are the statutes that you can get. You can never get more on that particular building. Commercial RC backs, different story altogether. You can get up to $500,000 for the building in general property, and up to $250,000 times the number of units of coverage for an RC back, like in those large residential condominiums. Miami, Florida comes to mind, if you will. Next. In all policies, and that most policies, I shouldn't say all, in most policies that you will see, you will always find, or possibly, unless they call it something else, an agreement or the insurance agreement. And in the National Flood Insurance Program, the insurance agreement simply states, we will pay you for direct physical loss by or from flood to your insured property if you pay the correct premium, comply with all the terms and conditions of this policy, and have furnished accurate information and statements, and then we will consider paying you for your claim. Next, please. And along with the insurance agreement, it identifies who is being insured. And it's like you and your, like you, the policyholder, your spouse, and if there's residents of the same household, your children, for instance. And they have to be shown on the declarations page, along with the policyholder's mortgagee or loss payee clause, who would also be identified and named on any check or draft that would receive any damages that would be paid out. Next, please. And the National Flood Insurance Program, the standard flood insurance policy, or the program, only has one peril, and a peril is something that we insure you against. And in the National Flood Insurance Program, it would be a flood. And we define a flood as a general temporal condition of partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres of normally dry land, or 2 or more properties, one of which is yours, from the overflow of inland tidal waters, from the unusual and rapid accumulation of runoff of surface waters from any source. Simply put, we will pay you if someone hit a water hydrant in front of your property and floods your house and the street. Those are 2 different properties, one of which is yours, which would be your house. We now have a definition of a flood, and now we can pay your claim if you have damages. And the criteria are: the condition must be general, the condition must be temporal, must be present, the occurrence must be accidental, excuse me, and adjoining properties. Next slide, please. Here is a picture of what most people think of when they think about a flood event. And we see this from time to time, a lot of times, quite frankly. And this is a flood. And usually 2 acres or more, one property is yours. If it's your single property on 2 or more acres and you have this much water, this would be considered general condition of flood. Next slide, please. And therefore you can have a claim and it will be considered. You must have direct physical loss by or from flood, which means there must be evidence of physical change to your property. And so when an adjuster goes out, the first thing he's going to do is look for a water line on the exterior of your property. If it's 3 feet where the water was, and there's no question that the water was there, then we have evidence, physical change, and we can consider that you do have a legitimate claim under the National Flood Insurance Program. Next, please. In the dwelling form, we have the policy that will handle a single family risk or a 1 to 4 family risk. And so this is, so we're going to look at some of the coverages and how this policy is laid out. So in the event that you do have a loss and you get this policy, you'll understand how it's laid out and where the coverages are. Next, please. The first coverage that we have is coverage A. Coverage A is building coverage, the building that we're insured. This is coverage A, or the dwelling, the home, however you want to identify it. And we also have additions and extensions, and we'll explain those in a few seconds. But we're going to insure the risk, and that's coverage A. Again, $250,000 is the statutory limit that you can get for coverage A in a single family risk. Next slide, please. And it also identifies what we're insuring, the described location, the location of the building or the property, the personal property that's at that risk. And one building, one policy per building is basically the NFIP and how they do things, except for a detached garage. You don't have to have a policy on a detached garage. The NFIP automatically provides 10% of coverage A to your detached garage. And I'll show you that in a minute. And it's not always the policyholder's mailing address, which we see in a lot of places, especially along the coast. Next slide, please. The definition of a building. As you can see, this house in this photograph is more than enough for a building. But in the National Flood Insurance Program, or the NFIP, a building is described as a structure with 2 or more outside rigid walls and a fully secured roof that is affixed to a permanent site. So there's no question about covering this picture or this risk or this building in this particular picture. Next slide. Earlier, I mentioned that we covered the dwelling and also additions and extension. The National Flood Insurance Program, or the NFIP, describes or defines additions and extension as things that would attach one building to another. And we already said that we have a statutory limit of coverage of $250,000, and that you also have to have one building per policy. But with an addition and extension, it sort of provides more coverage for another building on your property. In the event that you have a building that is connected by a roof, an elevated walkway, an exterior rigid wall, or load-bearing wall, or stairs, then your $250,000 policy can also be extended, will extend coverage to the other building that it's attached to. So instead of covering one building for $250,000, the program would allow you to cover 2 buildings with these extensions or additions. So you can cover building A and building B. You could cover $100,000 on the building A, and if you had $150,000 worth of damage on building B with a $250,000 policy, both buildings are able to be repaired as long as you have these additions and extensions on to that risk. Next. Detached garage. As we suggested earlier, the policy will allow you to cover the dwelling and also a detached garage up to 10%. However, the detached garage can only be used for parking and also for storage. Anything other than that, such as a residential, if someone lived in a detached garage, like the top picture sort of indicates, it looks like a little apartment, if there's a resident in it, or business use, or farming purposes, then the coverage would not allow us to pay you that 10%. It would be denied for those exclusions and those reasons. Next slide, please. Building A, or building property, also covers building materials and supplies, manufactured mobile homes, and building under construction, and the items that would be a part of that building, footing, concretes, and things like that, that's going to also be a part of that. Will also be covered under coverage A on the building coverage. Next slide, please. Coverage A, building property. The things that we just discussed are like from 1 to number 6. So here on on this slide, coverage A, number 7, suggests that in a building only, these items from A to T would also be covered inside of a building as long as they are a part of that building. So central air conditioning, built-in ovens, built-in dishwasher, blinds, awnings, range cooking stoves, refrigerators, wall mirrors permanently installed, carpet permanently installed over an unfinished flooring. All of these things will be covered under your building coverage. So if you don't have personal property, no problem. They will be covered automatically under this policy, under coverage A, building property. Next slide, please. Refrigerators, including wine coolers and other major appliances, also covered under building A, the building portion of the policy. Next slide, please. Number eight, these items of property in a building enclosure, and they're below the lowest elevated floor of an elevated post firm building located in zones A1 through A30, AE, AH, AR, ARA, and so on, and V zones as well. These are special flood hazard areas. And so property in the enclosures below these elevated buildings in these buildings would be covered, except for basements. There's no coverage for these items, and coverage is limited in the following of these: if they're installed in the location that they should be in the air conditioning, the system, the drywall, electrical junket, circuit boxes, and all of the other items that's listed here would be considered, except number 10 and number 17B, the cleanup, like in a basement. We would be covering cleanup in a basement, unless, of course, the items that are in the basement are not covered by the policy. And I'll explain that in a second. But so these are the things that are covered in those areas. Next slide, please. This is a picture of an elevated building. An elevated building is a building that has no basement and has its lowest elevated floor raised above ground by foundation walls, shear walls, posts, piers, pilings, and columns. And coverage will begin above where that first floor is in this particular slide. Next slide, please. A basement. And the basement has a lot of, I guess, a lot of highlight in the National Flood Insurance Program. A lot of people think that there's no coverage in a basement. That's why a lot of people have a lot of problems, as they say, with the program. However, there is coverage in the basement. It's limited coverage, but we do have coverage. Now, a basement is defined in the program as any area or building of a building, including a sunken room or sunken portion of a room, having its floor below ground level on all sides. Okay, and if that's the case, there's coverage, but it's limited coverage in the basement. Next slide, please. The area that you see, where the sitting area with the couches, the pillows, and there's a number of shelves or casing, or with a television, it looks like, or fireplace on top of it. When you walk down those 3 steps into that area, you are now in a basement. In that area, we have limited coverage, which means that floor that you see in that area, since it's finished flooring, that would not be covered. And the couches and all of the other things that's in that area, contents items in that area, and they would not be covered either. So those are the things that when we say limited coverage, they would not be items that would be covered in this particular situation. And next slide, please, because there is a basement there. I just want to share one thing. The last session that we had, someone questioned a walkout, and they say, would there be coverage in a walkout, the items in a walkout? Well, in the National Flood Insurance Program, in the claims section, we don't have what we call that would not be considered a basement. It's not a walkout basement. That would just be an area that you just walk out onto the land outside of the building. And so everything on the inside, since it's not, it's not subgrade on all sides, it would not be a basement. So all of the items and the contents items in that location, they would be covered because they're not in a basement. So I just want to share that. Coverage B Coverage B, personal property. This is contents coverage. Coverage B is contents coverage. Now, contents coverage in the National Flood Insurance Program is not a coverage that you get just because you bought coverage A. You would also have to purchase coverage B as well. And the thing with coverage B, it has to, the items must be inside a fully enclosed building in order for you to have coverage to it. So, and you also have a separate deductible as well. And so, and it's important to understand the items are inside that building, especially when we get further along into the presentation. And I'll explain to you why. Next slide, please. Coverage B, property we cover. We cover property, personal property, including property subject to B1, which is coverage, personal property coverage, B1, above which is covered under coverage B only. And so these items are also, they could be like air conditioning, and all of these things could be also personal coverage A items perhaps, but these can also be coverage B items or personal property item if in fact they are air conditioning units or portable types, carpet not permanently installed over an unfinished floor, or carpets over finished flooring. These are personal property type items that you can have. Clothes, washers and dryers, cookout grills, and things of these nature could be considered personal property that the policy will provide coverage for. Drapes, hardwares, and contents are contents, so we will cover those as well. Next slide, please. Coverage for items of property in a building enclosed below the lowest elevated floor of an elevated post-firm building located in the special flood hazard areas A1 through AZ, or in a basement, regardless of the zones, limited to the following items. So in the special flood hazard areas, things would be limited, as we suggested, or not covered. However, if installed in a functioning location, in those locations, in a post-firm location or in a basement, air conditioning units, portable, clothes, washers and dryers, as we suggested earlier, these things would be covered as well if they're down in a basement. So the scope of the basement, what we like to do is just want to make sure that everybody understands that, yes, there's a lot of stuff that people say is not covered, but please maintain the fact that there are things that are covered. And so that you just have to be aware of that at the time of a loss. Next slide, please. Tenant coverage, which is also coverage B. So we like to suggest to people that if you're renting something and you're in a special flood hazard area or whatever the case may be, you can buy a tenant-only, contents-only policy to protect your property. And we'll also cover if you own the cooking stove, range, and refrigerators. If you're the tenant and you can show that you purchased that and it doesn't belong to the owner of the building or that unit, then we can certainly reimburse you for those items. Next slide, please. A condo unit. In the National Flood Insurance Program, we have the RC-BAP. That was the third form of a policy that you could purchase. And we said that you could pay, that condo building can have up $250,000 per unit for that building to have coverage. However, you would have to have your own contents coverage for your unit. And so this is the condo unit owner's coverage policy. So this is how you would buy your contents coverage through this particular policy as well. Next slide, please. And we have what we call in the National Flood Insurance Program special limits. And special limits on contents and things of that nature would be like artwork, photographs, collectibles, jewelry, watches, furs, etc., and personal property in any business. Like if you have a business in your home or things of that nature, and you can get up to $2,500, and that's the amount of coverage that we would provide for that. So we do have coverage and for items such as artwork and things. However, we have a special limit on it, and the most you could get is $2,500. Next slide, please. Antiques. The National Flood Insurance Program basically suggests that an antique, what we would do is we would pay you the functional value of that item and not necessarily the antique value of the item. So we suggest that if you get a chair that was George Washington's chair, that the adjuster should find a reasonable chair of quality, of condition, and whatever the price is for that, we can pay you for the functional value of that chair. And also, we would depreciate the chair as well. So we don't have an antique value per se. We have what we call a functional value. Next slide, please. Coverage C also covers debris removal, and we would assist you with finances or pay you for bringing debris and things of that nature to basically the curb or to another location. So we would pay for debris, the insured property anywhere. Like if your property floats down the street to somebody's house or something that's on the property, you know, a covered piece of property that we would cover. Non-owned debris or on or in the insured property. And what we mean by that is, can you go to the next slide? Next slide. When we say non-owned, so we have a car, no, the other one. We have a car on top of the insured's house that was flooded. You can see all the debris on top of the house. And we see this from time to time. Well, that car that's debris, and what we would do is remove the car or remove that item so that we can fix the insured's house. If that was the insured's car, of course, we would not be able to do anything about that. So, so what we would do is remove it so that we can clean up and we can cover the building for repairs and take care of it, take care of that. Next slide, please. Loss avoidance. When we say loss avoidance, what we're saying is if you can protect your property from flooding, then we can reimburse you up to $1,000. Which means if you're going to go out and buy sandbags and sand, and we'll give you pay the amount of what is legal, a reasonable expense, then we can reimburse you federal, what the federal rate is for wage for you and I think your family members, but for anybody else who's coming to help you out, then we can pay them whatever you pay them as long as you have support. But what we suggest in this loss avoidance measure is that you have something from a legal or state or newspaper or something that suggests that you had information that your property was going to flood or was in imminent threat of flooding, and therefore you went out and purchased these items and sandbagged around your house, and that we can reimburse you for up to $1,000 for that activity. And it doesn't necessarily have to flood, but we would have to have some kind of documentation suggesting that the flooding is imminent and it possibly may happen. And then we can reimburse you for that. Next slide, please. Along with the $1,000 that we would pay to assist you with protecting your property from the flood, if you were to, and loss avoidance would also suggest that if you're going to move your property to a safe spot and you know that it's going to flood, or you have information that it may flood, so you move to another location to protect your property, we would pay up to $1,000 for that too. So you can get $1,000 for protecting the property and $1,000 to remove it to safety. But any property removed, including a mobile home described in 216B, must be placed above ground level or outside of the special flood hazard area for it to be covered, or for us to reimburse you for that. Next slide. The next slide. Okay. Also, coverage C or other coverages. There's also, if you are assessed, because the condominiums that you're living in, and you have common elements in that condominium association, your dwelling policy can help you with that assessment. If in fact there are covered common element items that you are being assessed for. For instance, if they're going to assess you because there was damage as a result of the swimming pool in the flood, we wouldn't be able to assist you with that because swimming pools are excluded in the standard flood insurance policy. So it would have to be a covered item. Loss assessment does not apply to government bodies, personal property, violations of conditions and maximum coverage limits. And things like if your house was built in 1962 and the government is saying you need to update those wiring in the house, the policy will not cover those type of things. Next slide, please. Now we're talking about increased cost of compliance. The policy, the standard flood insurance policy, have coverage D, which would assist you with bringing your house into compliance if, in fact, it was damaged 50% of the market value of your risk as a result of flooding. Or so we will pay up to $30,000. So the ICC coverage is included under the National Flood Insurance Policy. The standard flood insurance policy, ICC, will pay up to $30,000 if your building is substantially damaged. Next slide. Now, we would help. There's only 4 things that the policy will allow you to do. Flood proofing is basically for commercial properties. What we'll go in and do some flood proofing for that commercial building. But for your single family risk, you could relocate it, elevate it, or demolish it. And we would pay up to $30,000 for those, all of those activities for you to bring your building back into compliance. If in fact it was not in compliance prior to the loss or the flooding event. Next slide, please. So in the event that your building has to be elevated, the maximum amount of coverage is available is $30,000, and there's no separate deductible for it. And so what we'll do is once the community identifies it, goes out, inspect it, and they say yes. Next slide, you would have to bring this house into compliance, and then that coverage will be available for you. And in order for it to be eligible, ICC, it has to be substantially damaged. And the only people, the only entity that can make it substantially damaged is the local floodplain manager or the community that that dwelling is in. Okay, so so substantial damage was amended in 2004 in Iowa. The FIRA and Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2004. And what it suggests is prior to 2004, you had to be at least 50% damaged or substantially damaged. And if you were like this picture here, you couldn't rebuild that structure. It had to either be elevated, relocated, or demolished completely. So in order, because the community would not allow you to build it because it's a pre-firm building and it's out of compliance at this point. And so in 2004, what FIRA said was, you don't necessarily have to be 50%. The community can make it any amount they wish, a threshold of any amount they wish. So if they want a 30% substantial damage, then if it's 30%, then that's what you would have to do in order to rebuild it, is to bring it into compliance at 30%. Next slide, please. Property not covered under exclusions. We thought we would talk about some things covered, but we also need to share with you a few things that's not covered and excluded. Next slide. As I suggested to you earlier on the personal property has to be inside a fully enclosed building, the insured building. Because if personal property is not inside a building and it's outside on the yard or the lawn, like your lawn furniture and things like that, then it would not be covered by the standard flood insurance policy. Property in, on, or over water built after September 30th, 1982 would not be covered. Self-propelled vehicles, recreation that do not service the premises, land, shrubs, animals, crops, bills, monies, underground structures, walkways, decks, and driveways, anything outside of the footprint of the dwelling itself are not covered. Containers, fences, seawalls, piers, docks, swimming pools, these items will not be covered by the standard flood insurance policy or the NFIP. Next slide, please. Examples of some things that are excluded. Loss of revenue, profits, access, use, additional living expenses, getting to the property, you can't get there, but the property is fine. Economic losses, any economic loss more than likely will not be covered and is excluded under the policy. Code compliances, except for ICC, excluded from the policy. A loss directly or indirectly caused by a flood already in progress. And an example of that is in the Midwest right now, there's a lot of lakes in those areas. I think Minnesota claims that there's 10,000 lakes in Minnesota. And some of those lakes have been rising for a number of years. And so if your property has been inundated with water for the last couple of months or the last month or the last year, and all of a sudden the water gets higher and you decide to go out and get a policy, that policy would not be covered, the damages would not be covered because the flood was already in progress, or the loss was already in progress. Therefore, there will be no coverage for that loss. So you would have to show that, no, the water was not in my property, and I wasn't in a flood in progress, and we would have to do some investigation in order to do that. Earthquakes, landslide, land subsidence, destabilization, all of these things are not covered by the standard flood insurance policy. Water, moisture, mildew, mold. Now, when we suggest that you have a loss and the community says you are not allowed into this community or in this neighborhood or in this particular section of town until the water subsides or until the community feels as though it's safe for you to go back in there, then if you get mold or mildew in the middle of the summer when it's 95,000 degrees outside and you have mold and mildew that's growing and you couldn't get there to do anything about it, the program is very clear on that, and it allows you to go in and take care of that, and more than likely would probably give you some coverage on that. However, in that same circumstances, and you just decided that I don't feel like dealing with that situation at this time, and you can go, but you just don't go, or you decided to wait 2-3 months later, and you say, okay, now I'm going to go deal with my flood risk or my flood damage that I got a couple of months ago, and you walk in there and it's completely inundated with mold and mildew, then that is what the policy says will be excluded. Things that were in your control, but you did nothing about it. And things like any cause of loss besides a flood as defined. So the flood is one thing, but if you had a hurricane and the hurricane did a lot of damage, wind damage to your structure as well, that wind damage would be excluded, but the flood damage would be covered. Next slide, please. Requirements in case of a loss. This is where you have to really show your policy holder. You must give prompt notice of the loss immediately, as soon as you are aware of it. The policyholder must send a proof of loss within 60 days. If you wait 61 days, the insurance company that you're insured with do not have permission to pay that loss after the 60 days. So they would have to get permission from FEMA to waive that exclusion, that right there, so that they can pay you your claim. So it's imperative, it's important that you get your proof of loss in to your company within 60 days. And if you still have some issues, that can be dealt with on a one-on-one. Remember, what FEMA wants to do is pay you every dime they owe you under the policy as a result of the flooding event or that you've experienced in that loss. So whatever damages are there, if they're related to the flood and they're covered, we want to make sure that you get your money. So if you have a problem and you're not sure from the company, we still have to have that proof of loss in. Policyholders must cooperate with the adjuster or the representative. The adjuster is out there to investigate the claim. He's out there to provide to see what is covered, what is not covered, and to explain those things to you, and to explain it in a way that you understand why the NFIP or the standard flood insurance policy does not provide coverage for those items. That is his job, to explain that to you. And remember, the adjuster does not have the authority, nor is he can approve or disapprove a claim. That is, he cannot do it. The only people that can do that will be the carrier that you're insured with. Those are the only people or the only entity that can approve that claim, deny that claim, or disapprove the claim, or however you want to put it. A suit against us, the NFIP, policyholders cannot sue recovery for money under the policy unless they have complied with all the requirements of the policy. And in most cases, that usually happens, so it's not a problem. You also have to understand that you have 1 year from the date of a written denial of a part or the entire claim in order to file suit. And if you wait 1 day over that 1 year, then you're barred from filing that suit. And every claim that you would have, you should have a handbook that the adjusters make sure that you get. And the companies will make sure that you get one every time your policy renews and if you buy a new policy. And in there will explain to you all of your rights and all of the things that you need to do in order to have a successful claim experience with us. Next slide, please. The summary of coverage for group flood insurance policies. Most people who are getting a policy from a company like Allstate or Liberty Mutual or Travelers or any of the companies that sell for the NFIP will not be getting coverage for group flood insurance. Those are policies that have been purchased for people who don't have flood insurance and they had a grant or something to that effect. And that's how they get a group flood. So it's a whole different type of policy that's given to those people. Next slide, please. FEMA expectations for customer service. We like for you to have the resources to give you something, and so we want to make sure that an advance payment has been offered to you so that it can help you out in this particular time until things get better. Always remember though, that if you get an advance payment on your building, that's coming off of your total payment. So we like to give it under the contents portion of your policy to help you out until you can get back or get somebody out to do something for you. Understand the policy, the dwelling policy. If you have the policy and you're not clear on what it's saying or what the coverages are available to you or excluded to you or they're not covered, we ask that you get in touch with your company or the adjuster that came out to investigate your claim, because they need to explain to you what that policy will do for you. And sometimes it can be a little not real clear. So we ask that you get in touch with them immediately so that you can understand exactly what it is that's covered and exactly what it is that's not covered. And most of the time, why it's not covered, so that you'll know what to expect as a result of your claim. We expect that the software is updated when the adjuster comes out, that whatever area you're in, that software that he's using is up to date, and that, okay, I got 53 seconds. So anyway, let me hurry up and get out of here. Okay, next slide. And FEMA's expectation for the adjusters. Remember, they have to talk to you. They have to tell you what's covered, and they have to hopefully agree to the scope of what was damaged and get you to understand why he's paying for what he's not paying for. And the examiner at the company, they will confirm payment for the claim. I'm not sure I have any more time. If you have any questions whatsoever, I think we're going to have a session later or after this so that you can ask questions and if there's something that was unclear that we said. I also want to just say thank you for joining us. We look forward to working with Maryland